In the quiet corners of Italy, an object moves through history, like a shadow beautiful, silver, and whispered to bring misfortune to those who possess it. Its journey is traced in fragments, rumors, fleeting sightings, and untold stories that slip between noble homes, museum halls, and forgotten cemeteries. Some say it carries a curse, others insist it is merely a legend, but every reappearance leaves a mark, stirring fascination and fear alike. What drives people to chase it, protect it, or flee from it? This is the story of an object that refuses to stay in one place, a mystery woven across centuries, and a legend that challenges the line between history and myth. The wedding that never happened. The earliest verifiable reference to what would later be called the Basano Vase appears in fragmented local accounts from the Veneto region of northern Italy during the mid-15th century. The story centers on an unnamed young woman, believed to be from a family of modest landowners, who died suddenly on the night before her wedding. Surviving parish records from around 1470 mention a burial performed in unusual haste, with no public ceremony or priest-led procession. The bride was reportedly interred in her wedding gown and, according to oral tradition, was clutching a silver vase of intricate, handcrafted design. The object, described as finely worked with delicate engravings, was unlike the common tableware of the time. It is not clear how the bride acquired the vase. Later retellings suggest it was a family heirloom, though no documentation confirms this. Others claim it was a wedding gift from the groom's family. Local superstition attached to the item appears to have emerged only after her death. Multiple versions agree on one detail: she was in good health, and her death was both unexpected and unexplained. There are no official records describing illness or injury. The night she died is described in contradictory ways. In some versions, she was found lying in bed, the vase still in her arms. In others, she collapsed while preparing for the ceremony, the vase striking the stone floor. None of these reports are corroborated by primary records, yet they persisted in oral histories for centuries. The bride's family is said to have buried her quickly, with only a few relatives and household staff in attendance. Some sources attribute this to fear of disease, as plague outbreaks were not uncommon in Italy at the time. However, the absence of illness among other family members raises doubts about this explanation. The inclusion of the silver vase in the grave is a recurring motif, though historians question whether such an item would realistically have been interred rather than reused. The first recorded mention of the vase outside the bride's immediate family comes from an undated letter found in the papers of a minor cleric from a nearby parish. In the letter, he writes of a fine vessel of silver removed from the place of rest, under orders from a relative of the deceased. No reason for its removal is given, but the tone suggests it was not considered theft. The fact that the vase did not remain buried may have played a role in the legends that followed. Within a few years, rumors began to circulate that others who had come into contact with the vase suffered sudden misfortune. The accounts range from unexplained illnesses to fatal accidents. None of these claims can be conclusively tied to the object, but the clustering of stories in a small geographic area helped establish the idea that the vase carried a harmful influence. Descriptions of the vase from this period are consistent. A small to medium-sized silver container, possibly intended for flowers or herbs, with engraved floral patterns and a slightly flared rim. The craftsmanship suggests a skilled artisan's work, possibly commissioned for a wealthy patron, though no maker's marks have been identified in later examinations. Its material value alone would have been considerable, as silver was not commonly used for decorative vessels among the lower classes of the time. By the late 15th century, the connection between the vase and the bride's death had hardened into local legend. The identity of the woman is lost, with parish records from that era either destroyed or incomplete due to conflicts and natural deterioration. Oral tradition preserved the outline of the story, but with each retelling, the details shifted. Some accounts placed the bride's home in a rural hamlet near Basano del Grappa, while others claimed she lived within the walled town itself. This uncertainty over location and identity did not weaken the story's impact. On the contrary, the lack of specifics allowed the legend to adapt across communities. The focus remained fixed on the same central image: a young bride, dead before her wedding, holding a silver vase whose beauty concealed something dangerous. Whether the danger was real, imagined, or coincidence could not be resolved at the time. The object itself, however, would continue to reappear in accounts for centuries, each time accompanied by new incidents that seemed to confirm its ill fortune. A village's whispered fears. In the decades following the bride's unexplained death, the small communities scattered across the Veneto region began treating the story of the silver vase with a wary respect. By the early 16th century, references to it appeared in local oral traditions, passed quietly from one household to another. It was not a tale repeated in marketplaces, but whispered behind closed doors, often at night, when conversation turned to cautionary stories about misfortune. By this point, the vase was no longer described as a treasured family piece, but as something that carried a shadow over those who possessed it. In rural villages, where news traveled slowly and rumor often filled the gaps, the bride's death served as a fixed point in the narrative. The details, however, shifted. In one later account, her final hours were filled with restlessness, repeated prayers, and muttering about a gift that should be returned. In another, she told her maid she had dreamed of water flooding her home, the vase at the center of it. None of these claims are supported by contemporary records, but they show how the story was beginning to lean toward the supernatural. Around the same time, scattered reports surfaced of misfortunes linked to the object. These were rarely written down. Instead, they were remembered as events everyone knew had happened. In one retelling from the early 1500s, a farmer who stored the vase after it was removed from the bride's grave died in a haycart accident. In another, a merchant's wife who used it for display became gravely ill without warning. Whether true or not, such stories reinforce the vase's reputation as an object that brought harm. Local clergy sometimes addressed the matter, though rarely from the pulpit. Surviving notes from a parish priest in Basano del Grappa describe a silver vessel of poor fortune and advise parishioners to avoid bringing unfamiliar objects into their homes without a blessing. Brief though it is, the note suggests the clergy regarded the vase as more than idle gossip. The spread of the story was aided by the close-knit nature of rural life. In villages where families had lived side by side for generations, unusual events were seldom forgotten. The death of a young bride, especially under unclear circumstances, could be recalled decades later by those who had only heard it secondhand. As the story circulated, the vase became a symbolic warning, beautiful to look at, but dangerous to possess. By the mid-16th century, these whispers had hardened into a kind of taboo. It was said that anyone who owned the vase should pass it on quickly or risk misfortune. This belief acted as a form of social control. No one could prove the curse was real, but few were willing to test it. Even skeptics repeated the warning, ensuring the legend's survival. Some historians have suggested that fear of the vase may have been partly practical. Silver objects of fine craftsmanship were valuable, and in a region prone to raids during times of conflict, discouraging interest in a particular item could help protect it. Labeling the vase as cursed might also have provided an excuse for quietly transferring it to someone else. Whether deliberate or coincidental, its reputation kept it moving from one household to another, rarely staying long in any single place. What stands out from this period is that no one appears to have held onto the vase for an extended time. It never appeared in estate records or as a church donation. Both common ways, valuable possessions entered historical documentation. Instead, it existed almost entirely within the realm of hearsay, its presence marked by sudden deaths and quiet disappearances from memory. By the late 1500s, the vase's legend had taken firm root. It was no longer merely the tragic possession of a dead bride. It was a wandering threat, a silver vessel whose trail could be traced through whispered warnings and unrecorded incidents. For many in the Veneto region, even mentioning it aloud was thought unwise. Voices would drop, eyes would glance toward the door, as if speaking of it too boldly might draw it near. From heirloom to hidden relic. By the dawn of the 17th century, the legend of the silver vase had shifted from a localized whisper to a broader cautionary tale. Its appearances in the historical record remain elusive, but scattered references in private letters, parish notes, and travelers' accounts suggest the object continued to circulate, always quietly and never for long in the same hands. What began as a bridal heirloom had, over the course of a century, become something traded, hidden, or abandoned. Before it could draw too much attention, ownership of the vase during this period was never openly acknowledged. In rare mentions, it was described not by name, but through euphemism. The silver with shadows, the widow's vessel, or the piece one must not keep. These terms implied that the object's identity was already known to the listener, allowing the speaker to allude to it without risking an explicit description. The few stories from this era that have survived follow a similar pattern. Someone acquires the vase through inheritance, purchase, or gift only for trouble to follow. A landowner's son is thrown from his horse days after receiving it from a traveling relative. A Venetian spice merchant loses his ship and cargo in a sudden storm shortly after using it as part of a display in his home. In each case, the vase quietly vanishes from the scene soon afterward, either sold discreetly or passed on as part of a debt settlement. The act of disposing of the vase appears to have become a careful ritual in itself. Some accounts claim it was left anonymously at the doorsteps of strangers. Others say it was buried in outbuildings or cellars, hidden beneath sacks of grain or bundles of firewood. Whatever the method, those who parted with it seemed determined to do so without witnesses, a precaution that likely contributed to its absence from official inventories. For families of means, the vase presented a delicate problem. Silver of its craftsmanship was valuable, yet openly displaying it invited questions no one wanted to answer. There are suggestions that certain households treated it as a locked-away asset kept in a chest, rarely mentioned, and brought out only when it could be quietly exchanged for something else. In these cases, the object was not discarded, but treated like a dangerous document, important enough to preserve, too risky to use. The geographic range of the vase's appearances also began to widen. While its earliest stories are anchored in the Veneto region, a handful of later reports place it in neighboring Lombardy, and even as far south as Florence. Whether these sightings were of the same object or merely similar vessels that attracted fearful associations is uncertain. Still, each account shares the same motifs: unexpected misfortune, hurried disposal, and a deliberate effort to erase its trail. Religious authorities occasionally intersected with its history during this time, though not in ways that resolved the mystery. A record from a monastery in Padua mentions a vessel of silver, refused for consecration due to its foul reputation, returned to its owner without blessing. Another fragment from a bishop's correspondence warns against objects bearing a history of calamity, urging parish priests to advise their congregations against keeping them. The lack of specific names suggests that even churchmen preferred to speak of the vase in oblique terms. By the mid-17th century, the object's story had split into two versions. In one, it was still an heirloom, passed down reluctantly but never destroyed, as though its material worth outweighed the risks. In the other, it had become something to be hidden entirely, sealed away in a wall or buried in consecrated ground in the hope that it would not resurface. Both versions, however, agreed on the central idea: the vase could not remain with one person for long without bringing harm. The reluctance to destroy it may seem puzzling to modern readers, But silver was both valuable and durable, and destruction would have required effort, skill, and the willingness to defy superstition. Melting it down risked releasing whatever ill fortune it carried. Abandoning it intact meant passing the danger to someone else. Between those two choices, many seem to have opted for concealment, a compromise that ensured the vase would survive, its story intact, for future generations to rediscover. The merchant's fatal gamble. By the late 17th century, the legend of the silver vase had mostly been carried forward through quiet rumor and undocumented tales, until one account emerged with enough surviving fragments to place it within a specific time and set of names. It centers on a merchant from Verona, identified in partial shipping records as Lorenzo G., whose business dealt in fine fabrics and imported goods from the Mediterranean. Lorenzo was, by all accounts, ambitious and not easily swayed by superstition. In a letter preserved among the papers of a rival trader, he is described as a man who believed in luck only when it favored him. That trait would prove critical when the vase entered his possession sometime around 1685. The most widely accepted version of events claims that Lorenzo acquired the vase during a business exchange in Padua. The transaction involved settling a debt owed by another merchant, who reportedly insisted the object was worth more than its weight in silver, but should not be kept for long. Whether this was intended as a warning or a bargaining ploy is unclear. Lorenzo, uninterested in folk tales and focused on profit, saw only the potential to resell the vessel to one of his wealthy clients. Witnesses describe the vase as strikingly polished and well preserved for its age, with intricate engravings still sharp despite decades, perhaps centuries, of handling. The merchant displayed it prominently in his Verona showroom, positioned among imported silks and glassware. For him, it was a centerpiece, proof that he could deal in rare and beautiful objects beyond the reach of his competitors. The first signs of trouble arrived within weeks. A shipment of goods from Venice failed to arrive after the vessel carrying them ran aground during a sudden storm. Soon after, a trusted clerk fell ill and died within days, prompting whispers among Lorenzo's staff. Though he dismissed the talk as coincidence, he became noticeably irritable, his letters turning terse and impatient. Then came the wager that would seal his fate. In late autumn, Lorenzo traveled to Vicenza to negotiate with a noble family interested in purchasing the vase. The meeting, according to later testimony, turned into a tense back and forth over price. The nobleman, familiar with the local whispers about the object, offered a modest sum, suggesting it came with a shadow that no coin should buy. Offended, Lorenzo reportedly doubled his asking price, insisting the vase's history was merely a story meant to frighten children. When the nobleman refused, Lorenzo made a gamble that would become infamous in retellings. He wagered the vase itself against a shipment of fine lace in a private game of cards. Accounts differ on whether he won or lost the initial game, but all agree that before the end of the night, the vase was back in his possession, its shadow undiminished. Within a month, Lorenzo's fortunes collapsed. His largest debtor declared bankruptcy, leaving him without payment for a year's worth of goods. A fire broke out in one of his warehouses, destroying much of his stored inventory. Struggling to recover, he began selling personal belongings, yet the vase remained. Some claim he tried to pawn it in Venice, but was turned away when a goldsmith recognized it and refused to take it, muttering about the bride's curse. At Broxons, in February of the following year, Lorenzo was found dead in his home. The cause was listed simply as sudden, with no indication of violence or illness. The vase was not mentioned in the official inventory of his possessions, though neighbors later claimed to have seen two men removing a wrapped object from the merchant's house under cover of darkness. This episode marked the first time the vase's legend intersected with semi-verifiable records. The shipping manifests, merchant correspondence, and probate documents from the period confirm Lorenzo's existence, his profession, and his abrupt financial downfall. While none explicitly tie his misfortune to the vase, the proximity of these events to his acquisition of it proved enough for the story to gain new momentum. In the decades after, Lorenzo's gamble became shorthand for reckless pride. Verona's people saw it as proof that neither wealth nor reason could shield one from the vase's shadow. Its beauty, once a lure, was now a warning, woven into a tapestry of ruin that grew with each new owner, vanished into the shadows. By the early 17th century, the silver vase had all but disappeared from public mention. Its last confirmed sighting in Verona dated to the months immediately following Lorenzo's death, when a relative was said to have taken possession. No official records trace its path after that point, and it does not appear in any surviving estate inventories from the period. For an object of such value, this absence was unusual. In a time when silverware was commonly documented for taxation or inheritance purposes, the lack of written reference suggests either deliberate concealment or the fact that ownership was never formally acknowledged. Rumors of the vase's whereabouts persisted, but they were vague and often contradictory. Some claimed it had been sold quietly to a traveling merchant, vanishing along the trade routes that connected northern Italy to the rest of Europe. Others believed it had been hidden within the walls of a private home, locked away out of fear rather than greed. In a few versions, it was said to have been taken to a church for safekeeping, though no parish records or inventories support this claim. The idea of the vase being intentionally hidden fits with the social climate of the time. The early 1600s were marked by economic instability and outbreaks of plague across northern Italy. Objects associated with misfortune, especially those tied to unexplained deaths, were unlikely to be displayed openly. Even among those who did not believe in curses, there was a practical fear of attracting unwanted attention, whether from suspicious neighbors, desperate thieves, or local authorities wary of unrest. One of the few contemporary references comes from a 1623 letter written by a Venetian bookseller to a colleague in Florence. In it, he describes a visit to a client in the countryside who possessed a vessel of engraved silver, kept wrapped in linen, and stored in a locked chest. The owner reportedly refused to sell or even display it, remarking that it was not worth the trouble it invites. While the description is not detailed enough to confirm the vase's identity, the circumstances align closely with how it was rumored to have been treated at the time. By mid-century, the vase had effectively passed out of living memory for most of the region. This was not unusual. Objects that did not circulate in trade or pass through prominent families often disappeared from public notice, yet the vase's absence did not erase its reputation entirely. Folklore has a way of filling the gaps left by history, and in this case, the silence surrounding the object may have amplified its mystery. The lack of concrete sightings only fueled speculation about what had become of it. Some later accounts suggest that the vase reappeared briefly in the 1650s in the possession of a wealthy household near Padua. A fragmentary entry in a family ledger refers to the acquisition of a certain vessel, old and of doubtful repute, but there is no further mention in the decades that follow. Whether this was indeed the same object or simply another piece with an unfortunate history is impossible to determine. The similarity of description, however, kept the connection alive in local storytelling. By the end of the 17th century, the vase had slipped so far into obscurity that it existed more as a cautionary tale than as a traceable artifact. Its story was told to younger generations as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition or careless greed. In this form, the legend became adaptable, able to be retold without precise details, allowing it to survive in villages where the original events had long since faded from direct memory. What makes this period significant is the transition from an object tied to specific incidents into a relic of rumor. Without confirmed owners or physical sightings, the vase became a shifting presence in the cultural imagination, sometimes feared, sometimes dismissed, but never entirely forgotten. The absence of proof did not diminish belief in its existence. If anything, the mystery of its disappearance gave it a new kind of power. The question was no longer just who had owned it, but whether it might one day reappear, carrying with it the same ill fortune that had defined its early history. The nobleman's tragic fortune. By the early 18th century, the legend of the silver vase had become a story told almost entirely in whispers, its details softened and reshaped by more than 2 centuries of retelling. Yet in 1712, the object is said to have surfaced again, this time in the possession of a minor nobleman from Naples named Don Matteo di Rossi. While no official inventory lists the vase among his belongings, references to a silver vessel of unusual beauty appear in letters exchanged between members of his household and acquaintances in Venice. The timing of these mentions, coupled with the events that followed, would later cement his name in the object's long and unsettling history. Accounts vary as to how Don Matteo acquired the vase. One story claims it was part of a discreet purchase from a Venetian art dealer who specialized in older, privately held pieces. Another suggests it was given as a gift from a distant cousin, intended as a gesture of reconciliation after a family dispute. Whatever the origin, the nobleman clearly saw the vase as a prized possession. Guests at his estate reportedly remarked on its craftsmanship, engraved floral patterns, a gleaming surface that caught the light of the dining hall's chandeliers, and a weight that spoke to its solid silver construction. For a time, the vase brought Don Matteo no visible misfortune. He displayed it prominently in his reception room, often filling it with seasonal flowers or sprigs of rosemary, and took evident pride in its beauty. But within months of its arrival, a series of tragedies began to unfold. The first was the sudden death of a trusted steward who collapsed while supervising repairs to the stables. Soon after, one of the nobleman's prized carriage horses broke a leg in a fall, forcing it to be put down. A cousin who had visited the estate and dined in the room where the vase was displayed reportedly contracted a violent fever and died within a week. Though none of these events could be directly linked to the vase, their proximity in time fueled quiet speculation among the household staff. Servants began avoiding the reception room when possible, and it was noted in later accounts that flowers placed in the vase seemed to wilt more quickly than in other containers. Don Matteo, however, dismissed these concerns as superstition. An educated man who valued reason over rumor, he refused to believe a mere object could influence fate. The turning point came in the spring of 1713. During a formal gathering, a storm swept in unexpectedly, striking the estate with fierce winds and heavy rain. Amid the commotion, a lightning strike hit a nearby outbuilding, setting it ablaze. While the fire was contained, a falling beam injured Don Matteo's younger brother, who later died of his wounds. In the aftermath, several guests whispered that the vase should be removed from the house. The nobleman, perhaps shaken by the loss, is said to have ordered it placed in storage. What happened next is less certain. One account claims that, within weeks, Don Matteo himself fell ill with a mysterious fever no physician could cure. Another insists his death came suddenly and without warning, while he was writing at his desk. In both versions, he died within the year of acquiring the vase. The object's fate after his passing is unclear. Some say it was sold quietly by the estate's executors to settle debts. Others claim it was taken by a relative who left Naples soon afterward, disappearing from local record. What makes the episode notable is how quickly it entered the body of lore surrounding the vase. Within a decade, the story of the nobleman's tragic fortune was circulating in Naples, Venice, and beyond. Traders repeated it as a warning against acquiring unknown antiquities, while in rural areas, it became another chapter in the evolving legend. A reminder that wealth and rank offered no protection against the dangers the vase was believed to carry. By the late 18th century, Don Matteo's fate was among the vase's most told tales. doubters still found it a compelling parable of pride and fate. The vase had vanished, melted, hidden, or passed on its mystery, ensuring the legend endured, ready to resurface with each new misfortune whispered into history. The scientific skeptic. In the early decades of the 19th century, the story of the silver vase began attracting a different kind of attention. While rural communities still traded whispered accounts of its misfortunes, a growing number of educated Europeans, influenced by Enlightenment thinking and the rise of empirical study, began challenging such tales. Among them was Dr. Alessandro Bianchi, a physician and amateur antiquarian in Florence, whose interest in the object placed him at the center of one of the more documented encounters with the legend. Bianchi, born in 1781, had built a modest reputation for his writings on the relationship between superstition and public health. He argued that fear and rumor could produce tangible effects on human well-being, sometimes more harmful than the supposed cause itself. When he first heard of the Basano Vase, then referred to in his correspondence simply as a certain vessel of tarnished repute, he regarded it as an ideal case study. If he could acquire the piece, examine it closely, and live with it without incident, he believed he could prove its reputation was only accumulated folklore. By 1817, Bianchi had located the vase through a contact in Bologna. The seller, whose name does not appear in surviving letters, claimed to have kept it in storage for years after inheriting it from a deceased uncle. The transaction was discreet. According to notes in Bianchi's surviving journal, the vase was delivered to his home in late spring, packed in straw within a plain wooden crate. Bianchi recorded his observations with clinical precision. He noted its dimensions, about 25 centimeters high, with a mouth wide enough for a small bouquet, and described the engraving as floral, yet with a certain symmetry that suggests deliberate symbolic design. The silver bore faint tarnish, but was otherwise in excellent condition. There were no maker's stamps or markings to identify its origin. His first step was to display it prominently in his study, where he spent hours writing and examining artifacts. For months, nothing unusual occurred. Bianchi hosted friends, fellow physicians, and students in the study, inviting them to inspect the vase and handle it freely. In letters to a colleague in Milan, he expressed mild disappointment that no one seemed unnerved by its presence, and began drafting an article tentatively titled On the Persistence of Folkloric Misattribution. In October 1817, however, his notes began to shift. Bianchi wrote of frequent headaches and unusual difficulty sleeping, which he blamed on overwork. A servant reportedly left her position after claiming to hear whispering in the study when no one was inside. 2 visitors later remarked that they felt unwell shortly after handling the vase, though they recovered within hours. Bianchi persisted. In January 1818, he arranged for a metalsmith to take a scraping from the base for analysis. The result was inconclusive. The silver appeared of high purity, with no trace of harmful contaminants. He concluded that if any danger existed, it was psychological, not physical. Still, his journal entries grew shorter and more erratic, often skipping days. The experiment ended abruptly. On the evening of March 12, 1818, Bianchi was found dead at his desk by a neighbor who had stopped by unannounced. The cause was listed as apoplexy, what modern medicine would classify as a stroke. The vase was still in its place on the desk, holding dried sprigs of lavender. No damage or alteration to the object was noted. After his death, the vase again vanished from view. Some accounts claim it was taken by a relative who believed it might still have value despite the stories. Others suggest it was quietly sold to a collector in Genoa. The surviving record offers no certainty, only the knowledge that by the following year, it was no longer among Bianchi's listed possessions in estate records. What remains are the physician's journals and letters, preserved by a student who saw them as evidence of both his methodical approach and the strange events that shadowed it. While skeptics maintain his death was coincidence, the story of a man who set out to disprove the legend and did not live to publish his findings became another link in the chain of the vase's troubled history. A collector's last wish. By the late 19th century, the Basano vase had become a rarity even in rumor. Stories of its earlier owners persisted in regional histories and antiquarian circles, but no confirmed sighting had been recorded in decades. That changed in 1889, when the object reportedly surfaced in the private collection of a wealthy Venetian merchant-turned-gentleman named Signor Carlo Morandi. A figure of both refinement and secrecy, Morandi was known for acquiring rare artifacts with obscure or troubling pasts, believing that such histories enhanced their cultural value. It is unclear how Morandi obtained the vase. Some accounts claim he purchased it through a Paris dealer who specialized in unpublished treasures, while others suggest it arrived as part of an inheritance from a distant cousin in Trieste. Whatever the source, by the time it entered his possession, Morandi was already in declining health from what contemporary physicians described as a nervous complaint, possibly an early diagnosis of heart disease. Morandi displayed the vase in a second-floor study, shielded from the general public but shown to select guests during private tours of his collection. Descriptions from visitors match earlier accounts. Engraved floral motifs, a surface polished to a muted gleam, and a form that conveyed both elegance and weight. It stood on a low pedestal near a tall arched window, where the late afternoon light caught its curves in silver fire. Unlike some previous owners, Morandi did not dismiss the legends outright. In a letter to a friend in Padua, he referred to it as "my most dangerous acquisition," adding in a half-playful tone, "If it wishes to hasten my end, it will find me already weary of the journey." Whether this was bravado or resignation is unknown, but those close to him would later remark that his fascination bordered on fatalistic. In the spring of 1890, Morandi's health took a marked turn for the worse. He withdrew from most social engagements, seeing only a few trusted friends and a physician who visited twice weekly. Servants reported hearing him speak aloud in the study when no one else was present. One footman later claimed he overheard Morandi telling the vase, "You will outlive us all." By autumn, it was clear he did not expect to survive the year. He summoned a notary to his home to finalize his will, which contained an unusual clause. The vase was to be buried with him in the family mausoleum on the island of San Michele. This stipulation, he wrote, was to ensure it troubles no one else. The notary reportedly advised against the request, noting the potential value of the piece, but Morandi insisted. On the night of October 2, 1890, Morandi died quietly in his bed, reportedly after a day of relative calm. His funeral took place 3 days later, attended by a small circle of acquaintances and relatives. The vase, wrapped in cloth and placed within a simple wooden chest, was carried in the procession and interred beside the coffin. Official records confirmed the burial, but within weeks, rumors began circulating that the artifact had not remained underground. Some claimed grave robbers removed it, either for its silver content or because they recognized it from whispered tales. Others suggested a family member had ordered it retrieved in secret. By early 1891, an anonymous item in a Venetian trade paper mentioned a silver vase of questionable repute, offered for private sale to a Milanese collector, a description that many believed referred to Morandi's piece. Whether or not the vase was truly taken, the detail of his last wish became inseparable from its legend. In telling and retelling, Morandi emerged as the collector who, unlike others before him, acknowledged the object's reputation and sought to end its passage from hand to hand. That he failed or was prevented from succeeding only deepened the air of inevitability surrounding the curse. By the turn of the century, the story of Morandi's acquisition and burial request was a fixture in the vase's recorded history, repeated in both antiquarian journals and popular magazines. For skeptics, it served as another example of human tendency to weave superstition into coincidence. For believers, it was proof that even a man prepared to face death could not free the living from the object's reach. The wartime mystery. The first decades of the 20th century brought upheaval to Italy, and with it, a fog over the traceable history of the Basano Vase. For years after Carlo Morandi's death, its whereabouts were uncertain, with scattered rumors placing it in private homes, from Milan to Vienna. Yet it was not until the turmoil of the Second World War that the object surfaced in one of the most puzzling episodes in its story. In 1943, Venice was under German occupation, and the city's palazzi, many already stripped of valuables, were subjected to searches, seizures, and opportunistic thefts. Among the many objects catalogued by occupation authorities was a silver vessel, floral engraving, height approximately 25 cm, entered in an inventory seized from a small antiques dealer near Campo San Barnaba. No provenance was listed, but the physical description matched earlier accounts of the vase almost exactly. The dealer, Vittorio Lazzari, was known for acquiring items quietly from families wishing to sell before their property was requisitioned. How long he had possessed the vase remains unclear. The one post-war testimony claimed it had been brought to him by a gentleman of advanced years who insisted on anonymity and refused payment beyond a token sum. Lazzari displayed it in a locked glass case in the rear of his shop, away from the main window. The inventory record suggests that the German officers intended to confiscate the piece, along with other silver and gold items, for shipment north. Yet when the shop was sealed and later reopened for removal of the goods, the vase was gone. The lock on the display case had not been forced, and the surrounding objects were untouched, only that one item had vanished. What happened in the intervening days has never been conclusively explained. One rumor holds that Lazzari, fearing for its safety, smuggled it out through a sympathetic contact in the Venetian resistance, who passed it to a safe house on the mainland. Another claims that a German officer, aware of the legends, took it for his private collection and suffered some unspecified misfortune before returning it in secret. There is even a persistent, if far-fetched, theory that the vase never left the building, that it was hidden within a wall cavity or beneath the shop's floorboards, awaiting discovery. By late 1944, Lazzari had disappeared from Venice entirely, likely fleeing the deteriorating conditions in the city. After the war, his shop remained shuttered, and no official record of the vase's recovery exists. However, scattered anecdotal reports suggest it reappeared briefly in 1946 in the possession of a former partisan fighter near Treviso. According to a local priest's account, preserved in a letter to a historian decades later, the man brought the vase to the church, seeking advice on whether it should be sold or destroyed. The priest, reluctant to involve himself, told him to place it out of sight and let it sleep. The man left, taking the object with him, and was not seen again. If true, this brief resurfacing only deepens the mystery, for no further verifiable mention of the vase exists in the post-war years. Its disappearance amid the chaos of wartime. Venice fits a broader pattern. Many artifacts changed hands without documentation, their trails obscured by the displacement of people, the destruction of records, and the shifting moral boundaries of survival under occupation. Yet, unlike most such items, the vase's vanishing carried with it an additional layer of unease, sustained not only by its material value, but by the accumulated stories of misfortune tied to its name. By the early 1950s, historians of Venetian art and antiquities treated the wartime episode as a fragmentary but telling chapter in the vase's legend. It was, they noted, an instance in which human greed, fear, and superstition intersected under the pressures of war, producing an absence as notable as any confirmed sighting. For believers, the fact that the vase eluded both occupying forces and potential saviors was proof of its uncanny agency. For skeptics, it was a case study in how an object's mythology could survive, even when the object itself might already be lost or destroyed. Whether hidden, stolen, or melted down, the wartime mystery ensured the Basano Vase's story did not fade into peacetime forgetfulness. Instead, it re-entered the post-war imagination as an enigma, without resolution, another knot in the tangled thread of its history, and one that would continue to invite speculation from those drawn to its strange and persistent legend. The post-war deaths. The decade following the Second World War brought a fragile sense of renewal to Italy. Yet for the Basano Vase, the years ahead would be marked not by peace, but by a string of quiet tragedies that reawakened its legend. The object's wartime trail had grown cold by 1946, save for the fleeting and unverified sighting near Treviso. Then, in the early 1950s, it appeared again, this time in Rome, far from the lagoon city that had sheltered it for so long. The first credible post-war account comes from an auction record dated March 3, 1951. The listing describes one silver vessel of antique workmanship, 25 centimeters in height, floral engraving, slight tarnish, sold as part of a private estate liquidation. The buyer, identified only as G. Ferry, paid a modest sum. No mention was made of any unusual history, suggesting the auctioneer either did not know or chose not to share the rumors. Within weeks, whispers began to circulate in Rome's small community of antiquities dealers. Ferry, a bachelor in his early 60s, lived alone in a modest apartment above his bookshop near Piazza della Rotonda. Friends recalled his excitement over the piece, which he displayed on a shelf behind his desk, occasionally polishing it with a jeweler's cloth. But in June of that year, he was found dead at home, slumped in his armchair, the vase only a few feet away. The death was attributed to heart failure, though those familiar with the object's reputation noted the coincidence. The vase did not remain in the apartment. Ferry's niece, who inherited his belongings, sold it to a Milan-based dealer named Renato Bellini. Bellini knew of the curse, but treated it as a marketing tool rather than a genuine threat, displaying it prominently in his showroom and telling select customers the ghost story as part of the sales pitch. His bravado lasted less than a year. In February 1952, Bellini fell suddenly ill with what doctors described as a severe bacterial infection. Despite treatment, he died within 2 weeks. The vase, untouched, was removed from the shop by an assistant who, according to later testimony, wanted nothing to do with it. He sold it privately to a Turin lawyer, Marco Vassallo, whose interest in the piece was purely aesthetic. Vassallo, newly married and furnishing a large apartment, placed the vase in his dining room as a centerpiece. His wife reportedly disliked it, finding the engraving cold and unsettling, but deferred to his taste. That autumn, Vassallo was killed in a car accident on the road between Turin and Genoa. His widow, convinced the vase was cursed, gave it to a family friend, a retired army officer living in Florence. Colonel Enrico Battaglia was perhaps the only owner of this period who treated the vase with open suspicion. He kept it locked in a cabinet in his study and rarely mentioned it, except to say it should be handled with care. He lived with the piece for nearly 2 years before dying suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage in December 1954. His daughter, inheriting both the cabinet and its contents, sold the vase to a Neapolitan dealer specializing in ecclesiastical silver. Here the record grows murkier. The dealer's name appears only once, in a 1955 inventory of a shipment bound for Palermo. The vase is listed without its notorious history, alongside candlesticks, chalices, and other liturgical items. The shipment was delivered, but no further trace of the object appears in commercial records for the rest of the decade. By the late 1950s, these successive deaths had formed a post-war chapter in the Basano Vase's legend. Newspapers occasionally mentioned it in sensationalist columns, pairing its name with that of other supposedly cursed artifacts. While skeptics pointed to the inevitability of illness and accident, believers saw in the pattern a chilling continuation of the curse, one that had survived war, displacement, and decades of obscurity. In collector circles, the vase was discussed only in whispers. None admitted to owning it. The deaths of Ferri, Bellini, Vassallo, and Battaglia deepened its reputation, ensuring the legend endured alive, potent, and waiting for another owner to carry its history, and perhaps its curse, into the future. The University Experiment. In the autumn of 1962, the Basano vase surfaced in a setting unlike any it had occupied before, not in a dealer's shop or private home, but within the controlled environment of an academic institution. According to university archives, the piece arrived at the University of Padua in October of that year, anonymously donated to the Department of Anthropology. The accompanying note, unsigned and typed, stated only, "For study, not for sale. Provenance uncertain. Handle with care." The vase was received by Dr. Paolo Rinaldi, a young lecturer known for his interest in material culture and superstition. Rinaldi had grown up in Bassano del Grappa, the town from which the object's name derived, and had heard fragments of the curse legend since childhood. To him, the donation was an opportunity to strip away folklore and examine the artifact as a tangible piece of history. He arranged for a detailed catalog entry, noting its dimensions 25 centimeters in height, silver with a fine floral engraving, and ordered that it be photographed from multiple angles. In November, Rinaldi enlisted the help of the chemistry department to conduct a metallurgical analysis. The results confirmed that the vase was crafted from high-purity silver, with trace elements suggesting a Venetian workshop of the late 15th or early 16th century. Microscopic examination revealed fine wear consistent with long-term handling, as well as minute scratches from polishing. No hidden inscriptions or unusual residues were detected. To Rinaldi, the findings supported the view that the vase was a valuable but ordinary artifact. Despite his skepticism, Rinaldi was aware of the object's notoriety and decided to document any unusual events during its time at the university. He instructed his graduate students to keep a log whenever they handled or moved it, recording dates, times, and the purpose of each interaction. For several months, the vase sat in a locked display case in Rinaldi's office, occasionally brought out for seminars on folklore and artifact interpretation. In February 1963, a visiting professor from Milan, Dr. Arturo Bernasconi, gave a guest lecture in which he referenced the Basano vase as an example of how objects acquire reputations through anecdotal repetition. The lecture drew local press attention, and within days, rumors began circulating among students that the cursed vase was on campus. Some claimed that a student who touched it developed a sudden fever, though no such incident was formally recorded. Others whispered that a night watchman assigned to the anthropology building refused to enter Rinaldi's office after dark. On April 9, 1963, Rinaldi suffered a sudden fainting spell during a lecture. Though he recovered quickly and medical examination found no serious cause, the incident added fuel to the growing campus lore. The faculty council, concerned that the vase was distracting from academic activities, suggested transferring it to a secure storage facility. Rinaldi resisted at first, arguing that it was an important teaching tool, but eventually agreed to have it moved to a locked cabinet in the department's archives. That summer, the anthropology building underwent renovations. During the process, the cabinet containing the vase was relocated to a temporary storeroom. When the archives were returned to their usual location in September, the vase was missing. The lock on the cabinet showed no signs of tampering, and the inventory log from the move contained no mention of its removal. Interviews with staff yielded no leads. University officials chose not to publicize the disappearance, citing the lack of conclusive evidence that a theft had occurred. Internally, some suspected a staff member had taken it, either as a keepsake or to sell privately. Others believed the anonymous donor had reclaimed it. Rinaldi, for his part, told colleagues he was not surprised it had vanished, adding only that objects with stories tend to keep moving. By the mid-1960s, the vase's brief academic chapter was little more than a curiosity in the university's internal records, a case of an unusual donation that arrived without warning and disappeared the same way. Among the few who knew of its presence in Padua, the episode reinforced the sense that the vase could not remain in one place for long. The police report. In the summer of 1974, the Basano vase reappeared not in an auction hall or private salon, but in the dry, impersonal language of a municipal police file. The document, preserved in the archives of Naples Questura, notes the recovery of one silver vessel, height 25 centimeters, engraved with floral motif, during a raid on a private residence suspected of housing stolen property. The owner, 55-year-old Sergio Conti, was already known to the authorities for his ties to the black market trade in antiquities. Officers found the vase on a sideboard in his living room, alongside several church artifacts reported missing months earlier. Unlike those pieces, the vase had no active theft complaint, and its origin could not be established. Conti claimed to have purchased it from a Bari dealer years ago and described it as an heirloom. Whether he knew of its history remains unknown. 2 weeks after the seizure, before the investigation into the stolen goods concluded, Conti was found dead in his home. The coroner attributed the cause to accidental electrocution from faulty kitchen wiring. Among colleagues at the Questura, the incident prompted uneasy murmurs. One officer, aware of the rumors tied to the object, added an unusual note in the internal memo, possibly linked to superstition. With no legal grounds to hold it, the police transferred the vase to the city's property office. There it sat for months in a crowded storage room, another unclaimed item awaiting bureaucratic resolution. Those who recognized it sometimes avoided handling it, an unspoken courtesy to the stories attached to its name. By early 1975, the backlog of unclaimed goods prompted the property office to arrange a public auction. The vase drew little attention and sold for a modest sum to an elderly widow named Giovanna Russo, who lived alone near the port. Neighbors soon saw it displayed in her sitting room, positioned to catch the afternoon light through the balcony doors. Russo was known for her warm personality and habit of hosting friends for coffee. In October, she failed to appear at her weekly card game. A neighbor found her in her armchair, dead from a massive stroke. The vase was still in its place, polished and gleaming. It next passed to her nephew, a shipping clerk, who kept it for less than a month before selling it to a jeweler in Salerno. The jeweler intended to melt it down for silver, but before the work could be done, his shop was burglarized. Several items were stolen, including the vase. The burglary report contained no mention of its history, likely because no one involved recognized the object. After that theft, it disappeared entirely from official records. No further trace has been found in auction catalogs, customs reports, or seizure logs. Some believe it re-entered the private market, traded discreetly among those who had heard just enough of its story to treat it as dangerous. Others suggest it left Italy altogether, carried abroad by a buyer who valued it for its silver alone. Either way, it had once again slipped beyond the reach of documentation. Within the police archives, its brief presence remains a curious anomaly, an antique of uncertain origin, recovered by chance, linked in quick succession to 2 unexpected deaths and a theft. For the Questura, it was simply another object that moved through evidence rooms and property ledgers before vanishing. For those who tracked its legend, it was further proof that the Basano vase did not merely pass through lives, it disrupted them. The 1974 report became a minor but telling piece of the larger puzzle. It marked one of the few times the vase appeared in an official, verifiable context, its existence confirmed not by rumor but by the matter-of-fact tone of a police inventory. That such a document could sit alongside accounts of sudden death and unexplained disappearance only strengthened its grip on the imagination. To skeptics, the events of that year were coincidence. A fatal accident, a natural death, and an opportunistic burglary linked by chance to a single object. To believers, the vase's path through Naples proved its malign influence, striking swiftly, then vanishing. The police report became rare proof where tangible and legendary met evidence, stamped and signed before the Basano vase disappeared once more. The final private sale. By the early 1980s, the Basano vase's public trail had gone cold once again. For nearly a decade, it had existed only as a story passed between collectors, dealers, and the occasional journalist looking for a curious column filler. It was during this period of silence that the object resurfaced, not in a gallery or museum, but behind closed doors, in one of Florence's discreetly opulent apartments. The account begins with Vittorio Calabrese, a reclusive antiques broker in his late 70s. Calabrese was known in select circles for arranging quiet transactions between wealthy clients, deals involving rare items not easily found on the open market. In 1982, he was approached by an associate claiming to have access to a silver vase of exceptional craftsmanship and troubling provenance. Calabrese later told a confidant he recognized the description immediately. He had heard the stories decades earlier when active in the Milan trade, but dismissed them as folklore. Still, the object's notoriety added a certain intrigue to the potential sale. He agreed to arrange a meeting between the owner and a prospective buyer, on one condition: no mention of its rumored curse until after the transaction was complete. The meeting took place in June that year, in the drawing room of an apartment overlooking the Arno. The seller, a middle-aged man identifying himself only as Signor L., presented the vase in a velvet-lined case. By every measure, it matched earlier descriptions: 25 centimeters tall, engraved floral motifs, faint tarnish at the base. The buyer, an Italian industrialist named Carlo Moretti, examined it carefully, but seemed unmoved by its history, at least outwardly. The sale was finalized that afternoon for a sum roughly equivalent to 18 in today's currency. Calabrese considered the matter closed. Yet within weeks, rumors spread that Moretti had become increasingly withdrawn. Friends described him as preoccupied and consumed by his new acquisition, though none could explain why. On August 4, 1982, Moretti suffered a fatal fall down the marble staircase of his villa outside Bologna. The official report cited misstep and possible dizziness. The vase, according to a relative, was found on a pedestal at the top of the stairs, positioned as though it had been moved recently. Afterward, Moretti's estate entered probate, and the vase was not listed among his possessions. How it left the villa remains uncertain. Some believe it was taken by a household staff member before inventory. Others think a family member, aware of its history, removed it quietly to avoid further misfortune. Its next confirmed appearance came in 1983, when Calabrese was contacted by a Swiss dealer, offering to sell what he claimed was the Florentine vase to an overseas client. The description matched, but the seller refused independent verification. Calabrese declined, later saying he wanted no part of passing that thing along again. By the mid-1980s, whispers of this final private sale had spread among European collectors. The chain of events: purchase, sudden death, disappearance fit too neatly into the vase's established pattern to be ignored. Yet without documentation, it remained another fragment in a long line of unconfirmed accounts. Some argued the trail ended here. The vase sold to a buyer whose name never entered public record, its fate sealed in a vault or private gallery far from curious eyes. Others insisted it still circulated, traded in risky deals by those willing to gamble on its beauty while ignoring or exploiting its legend. For Calabrese, the episode marked his last involvement in the antiquities trade. He retired later that year, telling friends he preferred objects with no stories attached. Whether that was an honest admission or a veiled reference to the vase, he never clarified. Even now, details of the 1982 sale remain partially obscured, known only through second-hand testimony and the occasional hint in private correspondence. But within the collector world, the final private sale became shorthand for a transaction so shrouded in secrecy and so swiftly followed by tragedy that it was never mentioned without a glance over the shoulder. To some, the 1982 sale was coincidence. To others, proof the Basano vase chose its moments appearing in the lives of the ambitious before vanishing again. In that telling, it was another turning point, another knot in centuries of ruin, waiting behind locked doors in an unknown owner's home. The cemetery burial. By the mid-1990s, the Basano vase had not been seen publicly for more than a decade. For most, its existence had faded into rumor, overshadowed by fresher scandals in the art world. Yet within a small network of Italian collectors, whispers persisted not of sales or exhibitions, but of something stranger. The story came not from dealers or auction houses, but from a groundskeeper at a rural cemetery outside Siena. In 1994, while preparing a burial plot, he overheard two men conversing in low voices near the edge of the grounds. One carried a long wooden crate, the other held a spade. The crate, he recalled, was heavy enough that both men strained to set it down. He did not see what was inside but remembered the brief flash of tarnished silver as one of the men adjusted the lid. The object was cylindrical, narrowing at the base, with faint engraved patterns. At the time, he thought little of it. Only years later, after hearing an old collector's tale, did he connect the sight to the infamous vase. According to his later account, recorded in a 2003 interview for a regional history project, the men buried the crate in an unused corner of the cemetery, away from marked graves. When questioned, they claimed they were fulfilling the instructions of a recently deceased family member who had wished certain possessions to be interred. Bound by custom to respect funerary requests, the caretaker did not interfere. In the months that followed, he noticed the plot was never visited. No flowers, no markers, no names, only the slow settling of earth. Rumors began after the groundskeeper told a visiting stonemason about the peculiar burial. The stonemason, familiar with the Basano legend, told a cousin in Florence who shared it with a retired dealer. Soon the tale spread through collector circles. The cursed vase, hidden from the world, sealed in a coffin of pine and soil. Some saw this as an act of desperation, an owner so convinced of the vase's malign influence they sought to remove it from human reach entirely. Others suspected a deliberate hoax, a way to inflate the legend's value before a planned rediscovery. In 1997, a wealthy British enthusiast of macabre artifacts reportedly offered a large sum to exhume the supposed site. The offer was refused. Cemetery officials insisted disturbing any plot, marked or not, would violate local ordinances. Without legal grounds, no excavation took place. The groundskeeper, meanwhile, became uneasy about his role in the story. Though he had no proof of what the crate contained, he grew convinced that speaking of it had drawn unwanted attention. He stopped granting interviews and, according to neighbors, avoided discussing the subject in his final years. By the early 2000s, the cemetery burial was one of the most disputed episodes in the vase's history. Skeptics argued the details were too vague. The sight of tarnished silver could have been any object, and the timing coincided with other unverified sightings in Switzerland and France. Believers, however, found the account chillingly plausible. It fit the vase's pattern of sudden appearances, followed by equally sudden vanishings, with deaths or misfortunes trailing in its wake. There were whispers of a darker theory, that the burial was not to hide the vase from the living, but to bind it to the dead. In certain folk traditions of central Italy, dangerous or restless objects were sometimes interred with the deceased to anchor their influence. If true, the act was less about concealment and more about containment. No credible evidence has surfaced to confirm or disprove the burial. Ground surveys by amateur historians in 2005 showed no anomalies in the soil, though uneven terrain made readings difficult. The cemetery's official records contain no entries matching the supposed interment date, and so, the tale persists, an unverified but potent image. A silver vase, engravings dulled by age, locked inside a coffin beneath an unmarked patch of grass waiting. Whether the men who buried it ended its passage through human lives or merely paused it remains unknown. To some, this was the perfect ending, the Basano Vase entombed, beyond greed's reach. To others, only a delay, another chapter before shovels break earth and silver glints again. Either way, the cemetery burial remained a haunting metaphor, like a curse silenced but never erased, buried in the land's hidden memory. The attempted exhumation. By the spring of 2006, more than a decade had passed since the whispered tale of the Basano Vase's cemetery burial had taken root among collectors. Most regarded it as an unverified anecdote in the object's rumor-filled history. For a few, however, the idea that the vase might lie in a pine coffin beneath a rural cemetery outside Siena was not something to ignore. The initiative began quietly, at a regional antiques fair in Florence. 3 men each, with his own reasons for pursuing the search, met by chance in a corner of the exhibition hall. One was a retired art restorer who had spent decades handling delicate metalwork. Another, a part-time dealer in antique silverware, had seen the price of cursed or haunted objects rise in niche markets. The third was an amateur historian fascinated by Italian folklore. They all knew the 1,994 groundskeeper's account and the 2003 interview in which he described the burial of a long wooden crate, the faint glint of tarnished silver, and the absence of visits to the plot afterward. Each believed that, with patience and discretion, they could confirm whether the object lay where the story claimed. In early May, they made their first trip to the cemetery. Posing as distant relatives visiting a grave, they brought a handheld metal detector, small enough to fit into a backpack, and walked slowly along the unused corner described in the interview. The device occasionally emitted faint beeps, but readings were inconsistent, possibly bits of scrap, coins, or nails. None suggested a large, solid silver object. Undeterred, they planned a more invasive search. On the night of May 17, they returned under cover of darkness, parking half a kilometer away and slipping through a break in the fence. Each carried a spade, and one had a single covered lantern to avoid drawing attention. They began digging where the ground seemed least disturbed. The soil was heavy and damp from spring rain, slowing progress. After an hour, they uncovered splintered fragments of rotted wood. The historian insisted these were from a coffin or crate. The restorer noted such remains could be found anywhere. Then came the moment that defined the night's legend. The dealer claimed he saw the glint of tarnished metal in the loosened earth, a dull silver curve catching the lantern's light. When the others leaned in, it was gone, perhaps a flash of wet stone, perhaps a trick of the eye heightened by fatigue and anticipation. Before they could debate further, a low bark broke the silence. A man walking his dog had spotted movement and called the carabinieri. 2 officers arrived within minutes, headlights sweeping the headstones. The men froze, shovels in hand. Questioned, they admitted to looking for something buried years ago, but refused to name the object. No charges were filed, though the officers issued a stern warning. Further digging would result in prosecution for desecration of burial grounds. The men were escorted out, their tools confiscated. In collector circles, the incident fueled speculation. Some claimed the men had found the vase, but abandoned it when confronted. Others argued the wood fragments proved someone had staged the site years before to perpetuate the myth. The most sensational theory alleged that the carabinieri had secretly recovered the vase, removing it before the site could be examined again, a claim without evidence, but persistent nonetheless. For the would-be exhumers, the night ended their search. The restorer sold his equipment. The dealer withdrew from the trade entirely. The historian, once eager to speak about the legend, reportedly refused to mention the vase again. Whether this retreat came from embarrassment or unease remains uncertain. The attempted exhumation deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. If the Basano vase lies beneath that unmarked patch of earth, it remains undisturbed. If it does not, the episode stands as proof of how far people will go to chase an object that may never have been there at all. To some, it was a foolish venture doomed from the start, an intrusion into sacred ground driven by greed and curiosity. To others, it was a near-miss evidence the vase was close enough to touch, only to slip away as it always had. Either way, it became another knot in the centuries-old tapestry of ruin and rumor surrounding the Basano vase, one of the most enduring mysteries in the world of cursed artifact. A relic in the age of the internet. By the late 2000s, the Basano vase's legend had migrated from whispered conversations among collectors to the unruly sprawl of the online world. No longer confined to dusty books, auction catalogs, and guarded retellings, the story now moved through blogs, forums, and early social media posts, its details expanding, mutating, and sometimes contradicting themselves with each retelling. The first known online mention appeared in 2007 on an Italian paranormal message board. A user claiming to be the nephew of a carabinieri officer posted a thread alleging that the 2006 attempted exhumation had been halted because something metallic was definitely in the ground, and that officers were ordered to keep it quiet. Within hours, replies poured in, some skeptical, others insisting they had heard the same from a friend. The thread vanished within a week, reportedly deleted after heated arguments over whether the vase even existed. Its disappearance only made the story more appealing. Other sites picked it up, embellishing the details. A 2009 English-language blog claimed the vase had been dug up in secret by an unknown buyer and placed in a climate-controlled vault in Monaco. Another insisted it had been seen in a Tokyo private collection, complete with a blurry photo of an entirely different piece. In ghost hunting communities, the vase began appearing on lists of the world's most cursed objects, alongside the Hope Diamond, the Dybbuk box, and the Crying Boy painting. These entries often compressed centuries into a few paragraphs, replacing precise names and dates with vague labels like a nobleman or a wealthy merchant. Accuracy mattered less than atmosphere, and the internet proved a perfect breeding ground. With YouTube's rise in the 2010s, the story shifted into video. Dramatic short documentaries appeared, narrated over stock images of Italian villages, cracked headstones, and candlelit rooms. One popular 2013 upload gained over 1.2 million views by counting down fatal owners, exaggerating how quickly deaths followed acquisition. It ended with the claim that the vase was still buried today, somewhere in the Italian countryside, waiting for the next foolhardy soul to unearth it. Not all attention came from believers. In 2015, Bologna University students tried to fact-check the story for a skeptical podcast. Searching newspaper archives, municipal records, and auction listings, they found almost nothing verifiable before the mid-20th century. Their conclusion: the Basano vase was either a persistent local legend or a 19th century invention dressed in older details. Despite their careful tone, their work was largely ignored by audiences preferring the curse-laden versions. By the early 2020s, the vase had achieved digital immortality. It appeared in creepypasta forums, horror-themed TikTok accounts, and AI-generated art galleries, often depicted floating in dim vaults or resting on velvet and glass cases. Its imagined form varied wildly, sometimes silver, sometimes bronze, sometimes engraved with skull motifs it had never been described as having. Each version reinforced the idea of a shape-shifting emblem of misfortune, rather than a fixed artifact. For some collectors, this notoriety was chilling. Owning or even claiming to own the vase was now a public act, instantly discoverable and open to scrutiny. A 2021 rumor about a London dealer possessing it sparked Reddit threads, only for the dealer to deny it, posting photos of an unrelated 19th century urn. Others speculated the vase had been destroyed to avoid such attention, though no evidence supported it. In the digital age, the Basano vase no longer needed to be seen to persist. The internet allowed it to live in hundreds of contradictory forms at once: a buried relic, a hidden collector's prize, a melted ingot, a museum's unmarked storage piece. Each new retelling layered invention over rumor, ensuring certainty if it had ever existed was gone. To believers, this was the curse adapting to a new era. The vase had always chosen when and how to appear. Now it haunted search results and recommendation algorithms as easily as drawing rooms and auction houses. To skeptics, it was proof stories could thrive without proof at all, needing only people willing to share them. Either way, the Basano vase had entered a realm from which there was no return. Not the locked vault of a private owner, but the endless, shifting archive of the internet where nothing is ever truly buried. The cultural impact of a curse. By the third decade of the 21st century, the Basano vase had transcended its status as a disputed artifact and entered the wider arena of cultural symbolism. It was no longer just the subject of collector gossip or internet folklore. It had become shorthand for dangerous beauty, something alluring yet perilous to possess. Writers and artists mined the legend for inspiration. Italian novelists wove fictionalized versions of the vase into thrillers and Gothic romances, often renaming it but keeping its essential qualities: silver, finely worked, and linked to a trail of unexplained deaths. In these retellings, the curse was sometimes supernatural, sometimes psychological, a reflection of greed, guilt, or the weight of history itself. A 2018 best-selling mystery set in Florence featured a murder investigation centered on a Venetian funerary chalice, widely recognized by readers as a stand-in for the Basano vase. Visual artists found their own ways to adapt the imagery. Contemporary sculptors cast replicas in resin or glass, distorting proportions or etching new motifs into the surface. Photographers staged tableaux of hands reaching toward the object, faces turned away in dread. These reinterpretations often blurred the line between homage and parody, emphasizing that the vase's modern significance owed as much to imagination as to fact. In academic circles, the legend prompted discussions about how material culture accumulates narrative weight. Folklorists pointed out that the Basano vase fit into a long tradition of transgressive objects, in European lore items dangerous, not because of inherent properties, but because of the stories attached to them. Anthropologists drew parallels with talismans, reliquaries, and modern conspiracy theories, noting how belief could keep an object alive in cultural consciousness long after its physical presence had vanished. Film and television embraced the curse. In 2020, a streaming service docudrama devoted an episode to the vase as part of a series on objects that kill. Historians interviewed for the program cautioned viewers about the unreliable historical record, but the production leaned heavily on ominous music, shadowy reenactments, and quick-cut funeral montages. The result was a blend of scholarship and spectacle, the same formula that had carried the legend into the mainstream. Not all cultural references were serious. Internet meme culture found in the Basano vase an adaptable metaphor for anything tempting yet ruinous. A decadent dessert before a diet, an ill-advised relationship, or an overpriced impulse purchase. Posts on social media paired its image often a random silver urn with captions like, "Me, knowing full well this will ruin my life," followed by laughing emojis. This irreverent treatment paradoxically kept the object relevant, ensuring that even those mocking it still repeated its name. Tourism in Italy saw its own ripple effect. While no official museum claimed to house the vase, small-town historical societies quietly hinted at local connections in brochures or guided tours. In one Umbrian hill town, a bar owner displayed a reproduction urn in a locked glass case, with a sign reading "Il vaso di Basano, do not touch." It was theater, but it drew visitors who had encountered the story online and wanted to see something linked to it. The cultural afterlife of the Basano vase also sparked debates about ethics and ownership. Should a cursed object, if it existed, be displayed publicly at all? Would exhibiting it perpetuate myths, or serve as a legitimate artifact of intangible heritage? These questions mirrored broader museum discussions about displaying human remains, sacred items, or politically charged artworks. The vase, real or imagined, became a proxy for arguments about how much weight stories should carry in shaping public access to objects. By now, the curse had shed its reliance on physical evidence. Whether buried, locked in a vault, or melted beyond recognition, the Basano vase persisted as a concept, one that artists, academics, entertainers, and ordinary internet users continued to shape. It existed simultaneously as a historical puzzle, a cautionary tale, a joke, and a brand. To its believers, the enduring fascination was proof of the curse's reach. It did not merely kill owners, but ensnared imaginations across generations and continents. To skeptics, the same persistence demonstrated the resilience of a good story, capable of surviving without a single verified photograph or confirmed sighting. In either view, the Basano vase had achieved something rare. It had escaped the boundaries of its disputed history and entered the shared cultural lexicon, no longer just an object, but an idea. And ideas, as history shows, are far harder to bury. Where it might be now. By the 2020s, the Basano vase had become something of a ghost, widely known, endlessly speculated about, yet rarely seen. For centuries, it had moved through noble homes, modest apartments, auction houses, and even rumored graves, leaving a trail of misfortune, stories, and whispers in its wake. Its last confirmed sighting remained the 2006 attempted exhumation in a rural cemetery near Siena, though no evidence surfaced to prove the vase had been there, or if it had, whether it remained. This uncertainty added to the object's notoriety, fueling discussion among collectors, folklorists, and online communities alike. Speculation about its current location takes many forms. One theory suggests a private collector, aware of the vase's reputation, acquired it in secret following the 1982 Florence sale, and has since kept it in a secure, undisclosed vault. Such a collector might be wealthy, cautious, and indifferent to public recognition, motivated by possession rather than curiosity. This aligns with the historical pattern, the vase appearing, causing unease or tragedy, and vanishing once more into hidden custody. Some argue this explains why no official documentation or recent photographs have surfaced, leaving only rumor and hearsay to sustain the legend. Another possibility is that the vase was destroyed, melted down for its silver to prevent further incidents. Proponents point to repeated attempts to acquire or display it, the thefts, and near-constant media attention in recent decades. Destroying the object would ensure no one else could fall victim to its alleged curse. Though skeptics note there is no documentation supporting this scenario, only rumor, conjecture, and anecdotal accounts. Nevertheless, the theory persists, particularly among those who prefer the idea of finality, imagining the vase's story conclusively ended. Some enthusiasts hold a darker view, that the vase remains hidden, either deliberately buried, stored in a clandestine collection, or locked away by someone convinced of its malevolent influence. According to this perspective, the object is still active in shaping behavior, driving obsession, and haunting imaginations even without being publicly visible. Folklorists argue cursed objects derive power as much from perception as from physical presence, and in this sense, the Basano vase continues to exert influence. Its legacy is as much psychological and cultural as it is tangible, a phenomenon where belief itself preserves the artifact's aura. The digital era has complicated the question further. Even without the vase's physical presence, its image, reputation, and mythology circulate widely online. AI-generated depictions, videos, blog posts, and social media threads keep the story alive, creating a virtual version of the object that exists independently of the tangible artifact. In this sense, the vase might exist simultaneously in multiple imagined forms: a silver urn in Florence, a melted ingot in a Swiss vault, a buried relic in Siena, and a floating icon in digital spaces, each iteration reinforcing its legendary status. Scholars and enthusiasts continue to debate whether the vase will ever resurface publicly. Some argue that any exposure would immediately attract attention, speculation, and likely misfortune, perpetuating the centuries-old cycle. Others suggest that its survival depends on remaining unseen, allowing the legend to grow unchecked. The longer it stays hidden, the more its myth is amplified, becoming more valuable or more ominous in collective consciousness. Among collectors, the vase has acquired a quasi-mythical status, a perfectly cursed object embodying human fascination with rarity, beauty, and risk. Stories of past owners, nobility, industrialists, reclusive dealers are retold as cautionary tales. Its repeated disappearances and sudden appearances reinforce the sense that it chooses when and where to manifest, rather than obeying human desire, logic, or chronology. The lore surrounding it has effectively turned it into a living legend, existing as much in narrative as in material reality. Ultimately, the question of the Basano vase's location may be unanswerable, whether locked in a private vault, melted into silver, or buried beneath a field. It exists as much in cultural consciousness as in material form. Its legend has outlasted confirmed sightings, auction records, and photographs. Real or imagined, the vase continues to captivate, caution, and provoke curiosity, entwined with centuries of stories, superstitions, and human obsession. Its power lies in persisting, in collective imagination, inspiring fear and fascination. Wherever it is, if anywhere the vase waits, a relic of misfortune and symbol of human desire. The Basano vase may be hidden, destroyed, or still out there waiting. Its curse lives on in whispers and legends. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more mysterious tales. And tell me in the comments, what do you think happened to the vase? Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.